do you mean it's an effort to die?
That's an effort.
What do these games have in common? Each game is considered electronic poetry, or e-poetry for short. These games are specifically from Jason Nelson's Dispersed digital poetry project. This game is called This Is How You Will Die. It is one of Nelson's most famous creatures. It uses a code found in slot machine games to predict the player or reader's death. The predictions are inspired from plot points found in movies and novels. This is called the Poetry Cube. In it, the cube lets users enter a 16-line poem, and those lines are placed in a multi-layered section. The buttons shift the cube, changing and recombining the poem. This seems to be one of the most recognizable games as poetry play. This creature is called Evidence of Everything Exploding. Nelson constructed this game with an intense story background. He determined historical moments or signifiers of the contemporary condition that resonated important to him. For instance, the page I'm on is a title page for an etymological dictionary. It is to understand the origin of language and how it dominates culture. E-poetry is popular, an expressive form of creativity for the average man to engage in. However, e-poetry looks and acts very differently than traditional print poetry. There are many different forms that e-poetry can take on. Jason Nelson focuses on blending these e-poetry genres by incorporating collages of poetry, images, sounds, movements, and interaction. In Nelson's works, he has a series of interactive and creative digital poems that explore the experimental bounds of e-poetry. In an interview, Nelson reports that in creating these creatures, he continually finds himself pulling from poems, from found texts in 19th century engineering journals, old medical documents, strange maps, diagrams of computer systems, which are all filled with contemporary poetry. He also says that sometimes he filters movies, radio talk shows, and political speeches through speech-to-text software. E-poetry can build bridges between people on a level that other literary or artistic mediums cannot. The accessibility, freedom, and creativity that is involved in e-literature makes it an everyman type of game or artistic expression. Since a person doesn't have to be formally trained to make code, anyone can play around with some form of code and share their work for thousands of people to see and interact with. Nelson has said that video games are a language, an architecture for relaying ideas, for exploring some artistic, theoretical, poetic, educational, and economic idea that might not be said or reach certain audiences without the game interface. Nelson responds that the simple left-right-up arrow movement of his poetry games allows the reader to take the role of hero, to mentally live, however briefly, within the screen, and to varying degrees within all his creations, the reader/player truly does become the writer. Not that they are given complete control, but he generates text from their movements and or responses and reactions. For example, this creature that is playing is called Uncontrollable Semantics, and it responds and tracks the reader's mouse. The creator's ideas and aesthetic is still important to all his digital creatures. Nelson says it's almost as if he's giving and offering them access to the back of his brain, letting them drive a lumbering, hard-to-steer go-kart through poetic multimedia musings. Digital poetry isn't just published in print on the web, such as using word processors, because the function of that software is designed to merely replicate and produce printed copies. Instead, e-poetry uses technology that leaves a mark on the poem and how the poem appears or how the reader experiences the poem. Nelson also says that in the future, interactive interfaces might not replace paper or static screen poetry, but he is confident interactive works will soon be a critical component of the literary landscape. There is a tendency to use visual, spatial, and responsive thinking, and he thinks that it's just going to keep getting easier and easier to read these different forms of multimedia projects. Nelson, in particular, urges individuals to forge new frontiers. His work has been featured in galleries in New York, the National Library of France, the University of Edinburgh, and has been archived in the U.S. Library of Congress. His work has been viral around the world and through various networks. As a note, Nelson encourages people to learn new skills and to think in a non-linear, interactive way.
Vegetables, 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 peanut. And bees go buzz, 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 buzz. Oh, here are the chickens, oh look at the chickens, oh here are